that actually the way to achieve prosperity is to have those key things that make a prosperous state. The rights of property, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and democracy. All of these are essential components of success. If you take a single one of them away, you find that the others are not protected. So free speech protects democracy. Democracy protects the rights of property. The rights of property are part of the rule of law. The four always come together.
We fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio. And this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. Okay, this piece is entitled, "The Establishment Does Not Want Any Kind of Brexit." Yes, this piece is on Brexit. It's an interesting piece, though, because it comes from an Australian source of all places, and I will put the link on my site. If there is any doubt about the feelings of the British people about Brexit, then you have to listen to this piece. To my mind, you are left in no doubt that if the British people are not listened to, and the will of the British people is not carried out, as was voted for in the Brexit referendum, then there will be consequences, not only for MPs in Parliament, but the parties in Parliament, and also Parliament itself. Its very future really is at stake. I am reminded of those so-called poll tax riots in the 1990s. I remember them very well. So if you don't remember those, I'm going to play you a couple of clips. Here they are.
Tens of thousands of people demonstrated against the poll tax in central London, rallying in Trafalgar Square.
The head of the march was still pouring into the square as the first trouble started in Downing Street. The officer in charge of the operation believes the hardcore wanted to storm Downing Street.
Violence was caused by around 3,000 among them. At one point, mounted police charged a crowd of demonstrators. A woman in their path was knocked down and run over by horses. Then the looting began.
At this stage, the square had been turned into a virtual battleground. But running street battles are continuing and have spread to the area around Leicester Square, where cars are being overturned and shop windows are being smashed.
There have been more than 300 arrests, many by police snatch squads. Tonight, the hooligans have taken over.
Our experience of the event was dramatically different from that portrayed by TV news. What you're about to see, like all television, has been edited.
I particularly remember one young man being pulled out by each limb, by an officer on each limb, and he was more or less, well, he was stripped naked due to the force with which they carried him away, simply pulling at each end of his clothing, and the man was writhing in the middle. He couldn't do anything about it, and that was one of the most vivid memories I have of that particular moment.
You could actually feel the hostility. Every time the police moved an inch or two each way, a roar would go. I can hear the roar. It's something that you'll never forget. It was a roar of disapproval.
It started peacefully enough with a carnival protest through the streets of South London. More than 20,000 demonstrators, the organisers claimed, were drumming out their message that the campaign against the poll tax is alive and kicking. The police were out in large numbers as well, anxious to avoid a repeat of the violence of the Trafalgar Square poll tax protest 7 months ago, when more than 300 people were arrested. And speakers at this afternoon's rally, including Tony Benn, were confidently claiming that the event had been a success.
Today's demonstration shows that this government is on the ropes. Mass non-payment is a reality. The poll tax will be the major issue at the next general election. If the government doesn't back down, then they will go down with the poll tax.
So now I'm going to play you that main clip. And it's from a journalist being interviewed about Brexit. As I said, in all places, Australian television. It seems very strange to me that the UK media are not prepared to cover this issue, rather that they would prefer to grandstand and label those who want to leave the EU as voted for in the referendum as far-right extremists, or as Soros would no doubt describe them as nationalists. Here's that piece, and I caution those of you out there, do not underestimate the anger that is in the UK, just like the anger there was in the 1990s against the poll tax. Politicians of all stripes ignore the electorate at their peril.
Our dear friend in London, Brendan O'Neill. Welcome to Outsiders, Brendan.
Hi, guys.
How are you over there in the mad world of Brexit? Take it away, Brendan.
Oh, it's not going particularly well at the moment. I mean, Boris got a deal, which lots of people didn't think he would get a deal. He got a deal, the EU agreed to it, and he's agreed to it, and he's put it before Parliament. But, you know, the problem in this country is very, very, very straightforward. If you hear people saying that Brexit is super complicated and very difficult and no one knows how to work it out, that's not true. It's really simple. The crisis in this country springs from the fact that the people want one thing and the political class want another. I mean, it is that straightforward. The people, 17.4 million of them, and I am very proudly one of those 17.4 million, we want to leave the European Union. And the political establishment, more than 70% of MPs, more than 70% of the business class, 90% of academics, they want to stay in the European Union. And every single crisis and tension and conflict and argument in the UK springs from this fundamental divide. So Boris got this deal. It's, in my view, it's not a very good deal, but it's a deal which people didn't think he would get. But it's been blocked because the establishment more broadly doesn't want any kind of Brexit at all.
Talking about the establishment, tell us about this poisonous little quisling, the Speaker Bercow and the role he's played.
Oh, John Bercow. So John Bercow is the Speaker of the House of Commons. He's supposed to be this neutral figure who oversees everyday business in the Commons. He's supposed to be this person who takes a step back from the heated political nature of the House of Commons and just manages things and chairs things and makes sure that business goes through. But actually, he has taken the side of Remain. I mean, it is so blatantly obvious to anyone who is honest to themselves or anyone who has two brain cells to rub together. John Bercow is on the side of Remain, and he has frustrated the Brexit process in Parliament again and again and again. And let's not forget that this is a man whose wife had a sticker on her car saying bollocks to Brexit. And this is someone he comes, I don't know if I can say that word this time in Australian TV, but he comes from a world in which that's the sentiment that people hold. So he has, he's really used parliamentary procedure and he's mismanaged parliamentary procedure in order to hold up very important votes on Brexit, in order to shrink the space for discussion about Brexit, and in order to frustrate the flow of Brexit through
Brendan,
Parliament.
we've got a little clip we'll just play so our viewers can get a taste of this character Bercow. So we'll just quickly play John Bercow, the Speaker, independent so-called British Parliament.
I couldn't care less whether you like it or not. It is. I don't require any assistance from you, Mr. Stevenson. You wouldn't have the foggiest idea where to start in seeking to counsel me on this important. I require no response from you. I require no response from you, young man. I require no response from you, young man. I require no response from you. Get out, man. You will not be missed.
So you get a flavour of him there, Brendan. So this is the establishment, full-throated, just turning its back on the members of Parliament, correct?
That's completely correct. And, you know, his voice drives me mad. So listening to that clip has driven me slightly over the edge. But he has that, lots of people in the UK, lots of ordinary people look at the likes of Bercow and they think to themselves, that's the establishment. And, you know, this is actually, it's on one level, it's really funny and ridiculous and perverse. But on another level, it's actually quite tragic because with the EU referendum in 2016, we were told this was the first opportunity that ordinary British people have ever had, really, to not only select a party who would govern the country, but to potentially change the whole nature of governance, to change the way in which the country was run, to break away from the European Union so that we could have lawmaking done in a democratic fashion rather than in a technocratic fashion. And we voted in our millions for that change, for a radical change, for a positive change. And the establishment has turned around and said to us, you can't have it. Tough luck.
James?
We disagree with you, and therefore we will frustrate it. It's so sad.
So, Brendan, what comes next? The polls I've seen suggest that the pro-Brexit side is hardening, and yet the political class seems to be more and more pushing the idea that Brexit is dead, and they're going to make them go to another vote or do something to stop and keep an election from happening to stop that from occurring. If Brexit dies, and 52% of Britons want that to happen, they want it to live, what happens next? What happens to British society? What happens to the parliamentary system? Is Britain then an ungovernable country because the political class has rebelled against its masters, the people?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and I think what you're suggesting is absolutely right, because if Brexit doesn't happen, then in my view, the United Kingdom is not a democratic country. Now, I know that sounds very dramatic, and some people say it's melodramatic, but it's absolutely true. This would be the first time in the history of the franchise. Every person in this country has had the right to vote since about 1928, 1929, so it's less than 100 years. It would be the first time in the history of the franchise that we voted for something and it didn't happen. And, you know, the whole nature of democracy only works on the principle of losers' consent. If the people who lose the vote consent to the vote going through, that is such a fundamental aspect of democratic life. There are so many votes in this country over the past few years that I've disagreed with profoundly, but I consent to them. Even though I'm the loser, I consent because I recognise that democracy is far more important than my feelings. What we have at the moment is the withdrawal of losers' consent, and we have these millions of largely middle-class, upper-middle-class people and members of the establishment who are refusing to give their consent to the majoritarian vote. And in those kind of circumstances, democracy itself stops working.
But Brendan, we've seen in recent months protests continuously in Paris and throughout France. We're at the moment seeing them in Barcelona. And yet the British people in their hundreds of thousands aren't taking to the streets and saying, respect our vote, respect democracy. Why are the British so submissive in a way when the elite are doing everything they can to frustrate their will from being implemented?
I think that's a really good question, and I've said this before. I've said that the most shocking thing in Western Europe at the moment is not that French people are rioting, it's that the British people are not rioting. Yeah. It's that British people haven't taken to the streets in huge numbers and said, listen, we voted for something and you have to give it to us. Now, I'm not arguing for riots, but what I am arguing for is a form of protest, because the thing is, if the democratic avenue is closed off to us, if we go through all the democratic process as we should, and if we vote in a peaceful way and in a legal way and in a legitimate way, and we still don't get the thing that we want, that does raise the incredibly profound question of how we get it. How do we get this break from the European Union that the majority of people want in this country? And they want it because they believe that democracy should be done within this country rather than by experts overseas. So I think that the establishment doesn't quite realise the buttons it is currently pressing. And it doesn't realise that if it goes further and further down this route of frustrating the democratic will, it is opening a Pandora's box and it is inflaming tensions in this country.
Now, Nigel Farage, so he's regularly been on our show, as you know. Nigel was very unimpressed with this Brexit deal. So let's just say this Brexit deal does get through one way or another and it goes to a general election. The polls yesterday showed that a majority of Brits are unimpressed by the deal. So are we likely to see a situation, Brendan, where Boris literally emulates his hero Winston Churchill in that he gets his Brexit through but then loses the subsequent election, where the Brits say, well, thank you very much, but that wasn't good enough, we're now turning to Nigel Farage? Is that a likely or plausible scenario?
Everything's plausible in Britain at the moment. Things are in such a state of flux. It's such a confusing and exciting, in my view, political period in this country. But I think I agree with Nigel about Boris's deal. I don't think it's a very good deal. And anyone who's read it, and I have read most of it, it's very long, you realise that it's actually not that different to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, which keeps us beholden to certain European Union rules and European Court of Justice jurisdiction. It would create a vassal state situation. So lots of people are uncomfortable with the deal. But the thing that Boris has going in his favour at the moment is that the more that Parliament pushes back against him, the more that the parliamentary establishment says, we're not going to let you have any kind of Brexit, even your soft Brexit, the more he's winning favour among the public. Because the key emotion felt by lots of voters in this country at the moment, they are incredibly annoyed by Parliament. They are really irritated that we voted for this Parliament in 2017. 80% of the MPs in Parliament were voted in on the basis that they would respect the result of the 2016 referendum. They're now reneging on that. They're backtracking on that. So people want to clear Parliament out. So the more that Boris goes into conflict with Parliament, the more it benefits him in the long run. So as to what will happen in an election, that remains unpredictable.
You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, Spotify, and email. We're on Spotify under the podcast section. Type in Canadian Politics with a twist and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass these links on to your friends. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com/A-Radio, EHRADIO, A-Radio. And please click on the like button. Join us Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 11:45 Eastern, and tell your friends and pass the word. We only tell the truth, not what the mainstream media want you to know.